everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and today I want to talk about my ranking of all the legacy games that are out there. People have been asking me ever since the first legacy games came out to do a top 10, and I also got a lot of people saying, I get questions all the time, do you think there's too many legacy games? Well, guess what, folks? There's only 15 major legacy games, and it's been years since the first one came out. And so they are not dominating the industry. I count 15 major legacy games. I've played 14 of them. The one I have not played is Ultimate Werewolf Legacy, but my video editors played it and enjoyed it, but that's the only one I can't really talk about today. There's also a couple games that some people consider to be legacy style games. I do not. So for me, a legacy style game is a game in which you go through and there are permanent changes to the game, both sometimes additions and subtractions. Things get ripped up, stickers can be added, but games will be permanently changed from one to the rest, and it's almost impossible to reset the game to its original form. Escape room games could be considered this way, but they're their own genre. But I also don't consider things like Shadowrun, Crossfire, even though there's stickers in that game, it is essentially just a campaign game. There's a lot of campaign games. They're a very different thing. The big one that some people would debate over would be Gloomhaven. I don't consider Gloomhaven to be a legacy game. Again, there's stickers in it. Yes, some things are permanently changed, but you can easily reset and play the campaign over and over again. Fantastic game. It's just not on this list. So I'm going to go through the 14 games here from 14 to 1, talking about my least favorite to my favorite, but I want to give a shout out to everyone who designed these because these seem like the hardest games in the world to design. I mention that because number 14 is the only game on this list that I do not like, and that is Seafall. Now, Seafall from Rob Daviau, and this is not the only game he's designed. In fact, Rob Daviau is the king of legacy games. He's designed more than anyone else, and I think he's been involved in probably half the ones on this list here. He started the genre. He has made the latest game in the genre that I've played has been from him also. But Seafall is kind of this blockbuster spectacular fail to some degree. It came from Rob Daviau, from Plaid Hat Games, both on fire. Looked fantastic, sounded interesting, a pirate-type legacy-style game. But one of the problems the game had was it was based on an existing game. That base game was not that interesting. The story, not that interesting. It did not come together in a cohesive narrative. And you'll find that this game is critically panned, but there are groups of people who really do love it and play it, but it was a box office bomb, if you will, to some degree. For me, it was incredibly disappointing. I love the concept of it, but the game itself never grabbed me. And for a game that had a lot of piratey things to do in it, never felt like that panned out. I often felt like I was just going around doing some Euro game stuff, wild swings. There was just a lot of problems with this game. However, this game is still important to talk about because some of the things from this game have crept into other legacy games. It was a grand, bold experiment. I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad that Rob keeps trying new things. And like I said, this particular genre owes him a lot. Number 13, and like I said, I like the rest of these, but I have to rank them essentially by my own personal preferences, and that's what we have here. Number 13 is Zombie Kids Evolution. This one is simply 13 because it's a kids game. It's the only kids legacy game, although they're making a teens version of this later on this year. And this one, you are a bunch of kids in a school fighting off zombies. It's done in a very light way. Stuff gets added, you rip envelopes open, you find new things that are added to the game. A few stickers, things change. It's not dramatic, it's very simple, it's really easy. But if you want to bring kids and give them this legacy experience, this is the best game in that genre. Number 12 is Betrayal Legacy. This one is based on Betrayal at House on the Hill. And this one is lower on my list. I think that this is fine. I was extremely excited about it because if there's one thing I'm looking for in a legacy game, it's a strong story. And I thought Betrayal definitely has that. It does have a strong story. It's Betrayal at House on the Hill, and you're playing through a series of years. You start back in the 1600s with witches and stuff, and then move up, and you're following the same family because your character will likely die at some point as you go throughout it. Why is it lower on my list? Well, because Betrayal at House on the Hill has some weak points to it. The game is just a bunch of throwing dice and see what happens. The haunts that happen in this, which are going to be different as you go through and play them, and I do like that you can play some of these haunts afterwards, but they still have that problem where the haunts themselves might feel imbalanced, or one person has to go off and read the trader stuff by themselves, and you know, they may not, there may be some questions and things, and there's just some problems, I think, with the base game of Betrayal. It's a game a lot of people love, and I think those people will like Betrayal Legacy, and I enjoyed it. It's just that the game at its root wasn't as exciting for me. Number 11 is My City. This is one of the newest games on this list from Reiner Knizia. It's also one of the simpler games on this list. Essentially in this game, you flip cards over that show a building, everyone finds that building and puts it in a grid, and you're trying to put as many buildings in your grids and score points in various ways. The game has envelopes, and you will be adding stickers and things to your grid. You can play the game when it's finished, although it's not nearly as exciting as the Legacy game itself, but the Legacy game itself is fairly mundane. It's a good game. I enjoy it. But the graphics and the gameplay itself almost feel like a 2010 production rather than 2020. So it's a solid entry in the series. It's just not as high as other ones, thus it being number 11. Number 10 for me is Eon's End. Eon's End Legacy is based on the very popular deck builder Eon's End, which has fans which love the game. I'm not there. I like the game. I find it interesting. You're fighting a big bad guy with a deck builder strategy. You have these different mages. You prepare spells. You cast them. The big bad guy has minions. In this Legacy game, you do that over and over and over and over and over again, and things will be unlocked. It's maybe a good way to be. It almost introduces the system to you, and that's one of the reasons this one's lower is because the Legacy aspect of it is just not that exciting. It's like you open this and you're like, oh yeah, I knew about this mechanism from the base game. So to that end, I don't think the Legacy aspect of this one's as exciting, but I will say that this one has a really solid closing in the sense that when it's done, you're able to play it over and over and over again, which you can't do with most Legacy games. Number 9 is Rise of Queensdale. Now this is another one where the game itself was a brand new game. This is designed by Inka and Marcus Brand, and the Brands have designed a bunch of games. This couple is like a super couple when it comes to designing fantastic games. Rise of Queensdale is a solid dice placement game. You roll dice and use those and place and get actions, and this game lets you modify those. It has so much legacy, so many stickers. I played this game a bunch with the guys in the studio, but I also played completely through it with my kids. And I will say, by the end, I was like, all right, I'm good with this game. The gameplay itself, I didn't think was that exciting. And the story is flatlined boring. Wake me up when it gets interesting. It's just not. But it is a solid production. And if anything, the Brands have my respect to the point where they make another game, I'm there. They did what Seafall couldn't do in a sense that while the story wasn't interesting, the gameplay itself and the way it evolved made a lot of sense, and there was a lot of cool things. If you want a lot of game, this certainly has it. Number 8 is one of the lightest games on the list, and that's Machikoro Legacy. To the point where when this game was announced, I thought, who cares? You know, Machikoro Legacy. I like Machikoro, a game in which you buy cards, you roll dice, and if you roll what's on the cards, you get rewards. Machikoro Legacy does it in a really simple way. This is one of those Legacy games you can play through pretty quickly, and when you're done, you have your own custom set, essentially, of Machikoro that you'll play through. I like that. I like the way it unlocks different things. It's simple. It's one of the easiest ones on this list. It's very inoffensive, easy to jump into. A lot of fun. Machikoro Legacy. Number 7 is Charterstone. And this is another brand new game. This is from Stonemaier Games. So Jamie Stegmaier jumps into the waters here. He actually called the expansion for Viticulture a legacy game. It was not. But Charterstone actually was a legacy game. This was a worker placement game where you place workers all throughout the board, but you're going to be changing how their board is. The whole board gets stickered up. And it's a really fascinating campaign to play through. There's a very good app where you can play this and see what it looks like electronically. And one of the things I liked about this one is you could buy a recharge pack for it. The game came with a double-sided board. So I did not think that the end game settings for Charterstone were fantastic, but I was able to take that recharge pack to build my own custom game of Charterstone. Once you've gone through everything, Charterstone to me is a very robust, good worker placement game. It really is. And I enjoyed it. I didn't think the legacy storyline was particularly strong, but the production values were good. It was a lot of fun to play, and I liked the game behind it a lot. Number 6 is the one that started it all, and that's Risk Legacy. Now, when I went through this list, one of the things I said that Betrayal Legacy was at number 12 because the game wasn't that strong. Well, I got to be honest, I'm not a big fan of Risk either. But Risk Legacy had to be high on my list for a couple things because, one, it's, like I said, Rob Daviau did this. It started the whole thing. There was so many things in Risk that blew my mind. Risk Legacy was a futuristic version of Risk. And when you played it the first time, it just was like, what is going on here? There were boxes in there. When you opened them up, added things. At the very beginning of the game, you'd said, here's 2 stickers. Pick one to put on your faction. Give your faction a special ability. Cool. What do I do with the other one? Rip it up. Wait, what? I can never do that again? And when it was over and you were naming cities on the board, it introduced so many things that are still in use years later. And I enjoyed it so much more than Risk. I enjoyed playing through this a lot. It had fantastic surprises, did a lot of neat things. And while Betrayal Legacy, like I mentioned earlier, was essentially Betrayal House on the Hill in a legacy format, Risk Legacy took the whole game of Risk and changed it in and of itself and made it something different and really fun. Number 5, Pandemic Legacy Season 2. There's only one franchise in the Legacy series currently, and that's Pandemic. When I reviewed Season 2, I said I liked it better than Season 1. Obviously, that's not the case since you haven't heard me talk about Season 1 yet. But it's dropped slightly for me because of how much I like Pandemic Season 1. But if you notice, it's still in the top 5. It's still a really fantastic game. There was a lot of experimentation. Pandemic Legacy Season 1 was Pandemic with things at it. Season 2, they had to do something completely different, and it does it. There's a lot of experimental things done in this one. It's still really cool and interesting and unique and wonky, and I really like the storyline of it. And there's not a lot more I can say without spoiling it. Unlike many of the other games on this list, the Pandemic ones are ones you cannot play when the campaign's over, but they're fantastic, and number 2 is great. Number 4 is The King's Dilemma. The King's Dilemma is a game in which you are running a faction and you are kind of talking to the king. And in this game comes with tons of envelopes. And you will open these envelopes and there are cards to write on the things. And you won't even see all the content in this game. But you are part of this kingdom where the king is presented with different dilemmas. And you are trying to vote and push these things. And there are actually some pretty strong ethical dilemmas that show up. I actually think the King's Dilemma game is decent. Not great, decent. But the storyline is one of the best. Good writing. And I was just, when I played this, I was constantly saying, what's next? What are we going to see next? It's really cool. And I really enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun. This is one I think that will be controversial. Some people would put this one much lower. But for me, I enjoyed it enough that it made it to number 4. Number 3 is Pandemic Season 1. If there is a superstar on this list, this is the game. It is the highest rated game. It was the game that put legacy games on the map, while Risk Legacy was the first one. Pandemic took a game that was already incredibly popular, and when Matt Leacock took his great game and Rob Daviau brought the legacy to it, the combination was magical. Was it perfect? No, there's a few things they got better as time went by, but the story still has twists and turns where I can still mention a month of this game to somebody and they'll know. If I say September and you played the game, you will remember what happens. It is indelible. It will go down in history. This game is fantastic. It is a neat, it showed what this genre could do. Number 2 is Pandemic Legacy Season 0. This one just came out. Our review just went up of it. This one, though, is currently my top spot of these 3 games, and it's because you can tell that Rob took everything he learned from the first 2 and from other games like Seafall and things, brought them together and made one of the most replayable legacy games that there is, in a sense of when it's finished, you can't play it again, but you could get another copy and play through and get a very different experience. Great game mechanisms to the point where the base game of this was strong enough that I would play it on its own even if it wasn't legacy, and a fun storyline, twists and turns. Every game in this one felt different, which is something that most legacy games don't do. They'll have a lot that feels samey. This one never felt that way. Now, you might say, Tom, you're on a high right now. You just finished playing it. That is true to some degree, and time will tell if it drops down a little bit, but I don't feel like it will right now. You know, when it came to season 1 and 2, I was like, I don't know which one I like better, and I've settled on 1 being better. With 0, it's not a question. This one, like, if you walked all 14 of these higher, season 0 is like 2 levels above 1. That's how much I love this new season. But it's not my favorite legacy game. My favorite legacy game is Clank Legacy. Now, Clank Legacy is an amazing game. In fact, I'm currently playing through it a second time with my kids right now. I enjoyed the game that much, and it also is replayable afterwards, which is pretty strong. Now, this one is based on the Clank deck building game, a really solid game, a game I love a lot. But this game, which takes place over a certain amount of games, you are putting so much changes, there's so much story, so many things happen. If you like the change part of Legacy and new things happening, this does it so much over the course of any single game. And yet that game itself is fun, it's competitive. Most of these games seem to work best, the Legacy games seem to work best cooperatively rather than competitively. Clank works really well competitively. The storyline is based on Acquisitions Incorporated, which is a live role-playing thing done by Penny Arcade, which I didn't know if that would work in this. It does. It has enough seriousness that the game works, enough humor that it's a lot of fun. It's, as far as I could tell, very family-friendly. It is entertaining as all get out to play. I just love this one, and that makes it my favorite Legacy game. Alrighty, well, what is your favorite? Tell me in the comments below. There's certainly a lot out there, and maybe in a few years I'll do this again and we'll add all the new ones in. Although, like I said, there's not going to be many of them coming out each year because there's a lot of work to do in them. And again, a lot of credit to this. All these games are fantastic, but once again, got to give a lot of credit to Rob Daviau. He is the man who made this genre. He is the one who has done most of the games in it, and so I just wanted to give him a shout out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Until next time, I'm Tom Vasel, and these are my favorite Legacy games. We'll see you next time.